Our second video on the Enlightenment is going to very much look into the philosophical component of this movement that we see in Western Europe. And again, we'll be a little fast and loose on the dates of when all this is happening, but roughly coming the years 1550 to 1800 about in this discussion today. A lot of the philosophy that comes out of the Enlightenment is going to be centered around French thinkers and what the French are doing. Again, we get a lot of conflict in the wars of religion. France is having a lot of conflict as it's coming together as a nation. France is having conflict with other nations in and around it. So France very much is this hotbed of political and philosophical thinking from the 1500s through into the early 1800s. So it's no surprise that the French are going to be some of the major thinkers and major philosophers of this movement. And so what we see here is the French are trying to discover natural laws. We saw the search for natural laws in the scientific revolution through experimentation and observation and hypothesizing. And here, what the French thinkers are really trying to do is take a look at the philosophical world and try to look for natural laws in humanity, religion, and politics. And are there any natural laws that govern those, or is it all tied up in something different? So the French, as well as other Enlightenment thinkers, are very much looking, if we want to summarize their whole outlook in their writings and in their philosophizing and in what they're trying to accomplish, is they're trying to challenge the status quo, challenge the social order of the time period by calling for a just society based on reason. And that's the key kind of phrasing here, is again calling for a just society, one where everybody, again, you can think about what we get with the Declaration of Independence, of everyone is created equal and they're endowed by the Creator with the rights of natural rights of life, liberty, and for the pursuit of happiness. John Locke calls for everybody has the natural rights, natural laws, natural rights to life, liberty, property. So a just society where there's justice for everyone. And again, this is a society based on reason. That's why that's capitalized there. So very simply and easy to understand that's what they're going and looking for. So hints and winks and nudges to what they're trying to do here. So we're going to go right down through the chart, couple of charts today in this presentation. Start with Rene Descartes. Now, hopefully you've left some space on your study guide because we've already talked about Rene Descartes in terms of what he accomplishes in the realm of mathematics with logic and analytical geometry. But what we'll see here is that he's going to apply that same logic and analytical geometry to philosophy. And Rene Descartes' major contribution to the Enlightenment philosophical movement is that people should doubt all preconceived notions. Anything that you've come into with a situation, you should put doubt on it. Anything that's come before, you should be willing to ask questions. My daughter is 19 months, and the word that she says the most is, "What's that? What's that? What's that? What's that?" And then eventually, we'll the stereotypical idea of a toddler sitting in the car asking questions and saying, well, why? So that's the whole idea. Asking questions. Why is a teacher teaching it like this? What is the teacher trying to accomplish? Those are certain things. Why does it have to be this way? When you go to a McDonald's, why do you have to put the fries in the fryer? Now there might be a very simple and safe explanation for why that happens, but again, just because it's always been done that way doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way, or it can't be more efficient or more beneficial to everybody. And that's what Descartes' thinking. So Descartes, when he was applying this logic to all these ideas, if you work all the way through this, if you come into a room and you already know you exist, well, how do you know that you exist? Because you're doubting that preconceived notion. So the famous quote, hint, wink, nudge, that Rene Descartes comes up with is, I think, therefore I am. So in Descartes' philosophical mind view, in order to be able to prove your existence, to work all the way back, how do you know that you exist? Is that your ability to even ask that question about your existence. So I think, therefore I am, is Rene Descartes' famous quote. The Baron de Montesquieu is a famous philosophical writer as well. Montesquieu very much deals with the thoughts and ideas on government, about writing very much and very influentially on a system of checks and balances in a government, that no one person, no one branch of a government should have all total, complete, supreme power, that there should be checks on that particular branch of government, which then has checks on another branch of government to balance that power out. Montesquieu is arguing that power in one person has led to corruption, has led to problems. So you need to spread that power over multiple different branches of government. And again, this all gets into his ideas of the separation of powers. Montesquieu is going to be hugely influential when the founding fathers sit down and say, what type of government do we want in the United States? These are ideas that have already been kicking around, and they're kind of able to work their way into the Constitution of the United States. Voltaire is another famous of our Enlightenment thinkers. Voltaire very much writes about a lot of wide-ranging things. He is a major proponent of deism. We'll again leave some space. We'll come back to deism in a second. Deism, what it is just a simple religion based on reason and natural law. So deism sees a creator, a God, but God really isn't interested in your day-to-day mundane human existence. But this God created the universe, created the natural laws that run the universe, and then put his hands up, took a step back, and let those natural laws run the universe. So that's one of the things that Voltaire writes extensively about. Writes a lot about politics. Voltaire is also a major proponent of the freedom of speech. And his famous quote that kind of sums up his position on the freedom of speech is, I disapprove of what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. So what does he mean by this? This is the idea that sometimes you have to put up with speech that is vile, that is disgusting, that is terrible, horrible things, that how could anybody think that? But if you take away that person's right to say that, then what you end up happening is then what other things can't people say? And Voltaire is, in the simplest way, making an argument, a slippery slope argument, that if you say that Mr. Cranmer can't say X, Y, or Z, then Mrs. Cranmer can't say MNLO or ABC, and it kind of works. Where do you draw that line? So Voltaire says you just don't draw that line. If we believe in an absolute, total freedom of speech, then you can go and you can make fun of, you can call someone an idiot, you can call someone dumb and stupid and a horrible person for having that viewpoint, that opinion, but they should be allowed to say that, because if you take away their right to do that, then what other things can't you say? And that's what Voltaire is writing. And again, put yourself in the mindset, put themselves in his shoes of someone living in an absolute monarchy, where if the king doesn't want you to say that, the king can make a law. And if you say that, right to the dungeon. And France doesn't have a whole lot of habeas corpus precedents on the book, so that door is locked, that key is thrown away, all because of the words you said. So Voltaire says, let's not live like that. Let's go and have a little bit more freedom of speech. The last of the major French philosophers we're going to talk about is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now we'll get back into Rousseau in terms of his thoughts on women. So again, leave some space. But we're going to start here in his thoughts on politics, where Rousseau asks a question in one of his writings: how do you stop the government from enslaving people? Now remember, he's choosing his words carefully. Words matter. This is a French society where you can see slaves, where the French are enriching themselves off the backs of slave labor in Haiti and other places in the French Empire. So if you're back in France, you might not be a quote unquote slave, but you know of what slavery is like. So how do you stop the government from enslaving people? And in Rousseau's solution is the social contract. That then you'll get into social contract theory if you study John Locke, and this also gets into what Thomas Jefferson is writing, the Declaration of Independence, which is basically plagiarized from John Locke. And then you also get what the United States is going to be saying in the Constitution. But the idea that a ruler gets to rule on it with a social contract with the people, where you are giving up certain rights that you might have as a people to the ruler in exchange for that ruler's protection. But if that ruler then does not guarantee you some certain rights, you are allowed as a people to overthrow that ruler and get a new one. So that's kind of the contractual agreement between the governing powers and the people who are governed, and that comes from what Rousseau is saying. So to put some names with some faces, this is Rene Descartes. So his famous quote is, "You're right, I think, therefore I am." The Baron de Montesquieu is a major important person writing about checks and balances and the separation of powers within government. Voltaire is a writer who writes a wide ranging topics, but we want to hit on his ideas of the freedom of speech, the idea of I disapprove of what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it. And then Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who again writing a lot about different things in terms of politics. He's a major proponent of the social contract and social contract theory. So those are our French philosophers. Moving right along, we're going to get into two English writers and comparing their thoughts of what they come up with. And we want to be able to hint, wink, nudge, compare, and contrast these two English authors. And you're going to read one of these guys' work for a homework assignment. Thomas Hobbes is our first writer. We want to preface this before we get too far into it that this is writing in and around the English Civil War. So these guys are very much seeing the government and rebellion and deaths and destruction and people not getting along with the government and the government not getting along with the people. So a lot of this is all happening right before their eyes. So that's what's going to be coloring what their kind of perception of the world is. So Thomas Hobbes, gonna again, like all these guys, gonna write a lot of different things. He's most famous for his work called Leviathan. And Joliet Catholic, you're probably pretty familiar with your Bible, so you know that Leviathan is a sea monster from the depths written in the Bible. And again, a big, huge, giant sea monster. The bigness and largeness is something we want to stretch there. Thomas Hobbes sees that when you get down to it, when you take man and you put him not in a London drawing room or a Paris salon or a German plaza, and you drop them into a state of nature on the Serengeti, okay, or in the Great Plains or in the steppes of Russia, the nature of man is bad. Men are jerks. They live lives, and his famous quote is, that are nasty, brutish, and short. People are bad to each other in their natural state. They're no different from any other animal that has wants, needs, and desires. Therefore, Hobbes argues that because man is a bad thing, they don't deserve any natural rights. They have none, just like how there's no natural rights for a walrus or a clownfish or an elm tree. So you have no natural rights. Therefore, Hobbes believes that the best type of government is an absolute monarchy, because there's less people to have a say in the power, so you only have one person to fear. And that's his Hobbes' argument here. Is Hobbes' argument, as he's again experiencing the Civil War, is if everybody is against you and everybody's fighting the government, that's anarchy. In a state of anarchy, you cannot trust anyone because remember, this nature of man is bad. And so, who is your enemy? Then everybody is your enemy, and humans can't work cooperatively. But if the absolute monarch is the only person in power, instead of having to go and worry about whether your neighbors are going to come in and slit your throat in the middle of the night, you only have to worry about the king coming and slitting your throat in the middle of the night, right, or sending his goons. So there's less to worry about. There's less power being shared, and more decisions can be made. And that's kind of what Hobbes' argument there. So Hobbes really says there's no real social contract between the governing powers and the governed powers, that the social contract really is just between God and him using the divine right of kings to pick that absolute monarch. John Locke is our other English writer, and when we're talking about Locke on government, now we'll talk about Locke and some other things in the next slide. John Locke's major works, again, wide-ranging stuff, writes a lot of stuff. His major works on politics are his two treatises of government. Now, John Locke, unlike Hobbes, says that when you put man in a state of nature, when you get down to it, man, and when we say man, we're talking about universal mankind here, people are good. People will help each other out. People are working together. They're good for each other. Because people are good, they are guaranteed the natural rights of life, liberty, and property. You have the right to not be killed by anybody. You have the right to your own freedom, and you have the right to certain property of your own. So his government is a constitutional monarchy that he describes as being the best. Now, the thought being that, again, a democracy is such a wild and crazy idea to be able to come up with. He can't even fathom that as a type of government. But this government, as a constitutional monarchy, has the law as the supreme power of the land, and the monarchs working within the different branches of government to do that. So John Locke very much piggybacks on Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract theory, and John Locke says that the social contract that does exist is between the governing powers and the people. The governed rule by the consent of the governed, which is right out of the Declaration of Independence, which Jefferson steals from John Locke. So those are the two writers that you want to be able to compare and contrast. And so again, you have Thomas Hobbes there on the left, and we'll read some of his writings for a homework assignment, as we said, and then John Locke there on the right. When we want to talk about other Enlightenment thinkers, we want to hit on some of the other big ones. Immanuel Kant is a German writer, and in terms of writing in the Enlightenment, he very much describes what the Enlightenment is. Kant writes an influential um, treatise where he is recognizing that there's something happening, there's something in the air, there's something different about how people in Europe are thinking. And so what he says is that we can describe this movement. This is the Enlightenment movement. And what should be the motto of this Enlightenment? Dare to know. You shouldn't be that typical freshman with your head to you're glued to your phone, and kind of locking yourself up on your computer and just saying, Mr. Kramer, I don't want to read books because books are dumb. I just watch the movie. Dare to know. Have that curiosity, want to learn about the world. And this is what drives the Enlightenment. He also writes, again, wide-ranging things, the spirit of criticism, that you should be able to criticize constructively or to be able to go and improve stuff, natural rights, and his belief in the idea of change, that the belief in progress, that things are going to get better, maybe not in your lifetime, but maybe your children's or your grandchildren's or your grandchildren's children. Pierre Bailly is a French Enlightenment thinker. He writes to try to revive skepticism as a philosophical branch, to ask questions, to be skeptical of what's going on. That when researchers in September in Mexico bring aliens, mummified alien remains to the Congress in Mexico, that you ask questions about them and you say, what's the deal with this? And why are we only hearing about this now? To be able to, again, that gets the idea back into Bailly. Bailly, writing about religion, says it should be about correct behavior, not correct belief. So that kind of brings back these ideas of Erasmus that he's writing about Christian humanism, in that, again, it's not so much Christianity should be one of the heart, not one of correct dogma. Your beliefs matter more than your actions, is what Bailly is trying to get at, and he's built upon the writings of other authors. Hey, our buddy John Locke. All right, so what does John Locke write about when he's not writing about the politics and stuff? John Locke writes about the idea of the human mind as a blank slate, in Latin, a tabula rasa. So you are not born with any preconceived notions when you're a tiny little baby, still gooey from sliding on your mom. You are a blank slate to build anything that you want on in terms of your experiences and the knowledge that you absorb. So this gets into the ideas that humans are educable and the idea of human improvability. What Locke is trying to get at, that if your dad was a carpenter and his 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 dad is a carpenter, so much so that your last name will eventually become Carpenter, and you have the dance inside of you, you don't have to be a carpenter. You can go and express yourself through the dance and do your jazz hands and what have you, uh, because you're not born with any innate carpenterness. You are a blank slate to be able to build your own life on. And that's a huge thing that's very counterintuitive to a lot of the medieval thinking that's still going on in Europe at the time, where again, you're kind of doing what your father's father's father has been doing for millennia in some places, just because that's the way it always has been and that's what you are. You're a farmer, you're a miller, you're a Fletcher, and that's all there is in life. But maybe there isn't, is what Locke is trying to argue here. In terms of economics, Adam Smith is going to write a very influential book called The Wealth of Nations. We're going to keep coming back to the idea of capitalism again and again and again, but Adam Smith very much is kind of this father of modern day thinking about capitalism and liberal economics. The modern United States economic system that we have in place today in the year of our Lord 2023 is one very much rooted into Adam Smith style capitalism, with some things he kind of added and taken away from Smith's thinking. Now, the Scottish Adam Smith says that individual self-interest drives markets. So there's some sort of what he describes as an invisible hand, which is this ethereal, you can't see it, you can't feel it, but it's there, which guides the marketplace. Therefore, the government should take a laissez-faire or hands-off approach to the economy. Every time Smith has argued throughout history that the government is trying to get their hands into the economy, it's spiraled out of control and been terrible. So Smith is arguing that people in a marketplace make decisions, and those decisions pick those winners and losers. So I'm going to go to this lemonade shop because this lemonade is cheaper, better, and has better advertising and does all and has better employees rather than the lemonade shop 2 stars over. So the government shouldn't be propping up and giving extra money to the bad lemonade shop because they're making bad lemonade. You should encourage the good people who are the good lemonade makers who are making the good lemonade. The government should stay out and not have everybody because millions and millions and millions and millions of individual self-interest will pick in the marketplace winners and will pick in the marketplace losers for certain criteria, and that humans are doing this by themselves without thinking about actually doing this. When I go and buy a certain brand of cereal from the store, I'm not thinking that I'm controlling the entire marketplace for cereal in the United States. But if you times that by 330 something million Americans, then you start to see that this X cereal is better and it sells more, it makes more money than Y cereal, and the government should keep their hands out of it. And that's what Smith is arguing for, and that's what we see very much argued by a lot of economists today in the United States. The final major Enlightenment thinker, just in terms of the overall Enlightenment, is Denis Diderot. And so if we go and work our way through all these different ideas, if Immanuel Kant's saying that curiosity, daring to know, is one of the most important things that's driving this new way of thinking. If you want to be like Bailly and have skepticism, if you want to have a human mind as a blank slate like John Locke, if you believe in the idea of Rene Descartes and trying to go and doubt all preconceived notions, that means you have to be able to go and think about what else is out there. So Diderot says, well, what is out there? And he's going to write his encyclopedia. And the encyclopedia is an encyclopedia. It's trying to gather all known knowledge, because if you know all the knowledge of the world, that will then destroy any superstition that might be out there and expand human knowledge, thus benefiting all mankind. And that's what Diderot is seeking when he does that, writes this. We get a lot of French writers that we've already talked about. Voltaire writes a lot of encyclopedia entries in Diderot's encyclopedia. And as we've seen, the knowledge of humankind has only grown more and more and more and more since this. But what we see is Diderot laying the foundations for a collection of knowledge in his encyclopedia. So here's the German Immanuel Kant, again, very much going in describing the idea of the model of the Enlightenment, daring to know. There's Pierre Bailly. We already talked about Adams. We already saw our John Locke painting. Here's Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations. And again, Adam Smith very much talking about a invisible hand, that there is a ethereal accumulation of all the millions of individuals in a marketplace making decisions that make some people big, giant, big businessmen, fat cats, and other people fail as businessmen, and they got to go back and try something different if they want to succeed. Diderot is going to be here On the left is a painting of him, and again, this is the cover page of his encyclopedia, which very much is his dictionary of scientific reason if you go and translate the French there in this first edition printing. When we're thinking about religion, remember the context of the Enlightenment is within and following these great waves of wars of religion in Europe between Protestants and Catholics, and all these Christians fighting each other because you're not the right flavor of Christianity. So when we see the Enlightenment, we can see the Enlightenment as an important episode in the secularization of the West. It should not surprise anybody that the most secular, non-religious region of the earth is Western Europe today, and that very much has to deal with the near constant wars of religion that take place following the Reformation in this place on the earth during this time period. The Enlightenment can also be seen as a struggle against absolute truth and original sin, that the world isn't black and white, that there's innumerable shades of gray. And the Enlightenment is trying to go and pick out and tease those out there. And the famous German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel writes, the Enlightenment carried out the Reformation in a different form. So when we're thinking about religion, we can go and take a look at different ways that the Enlightenment thinkers are trying to find reason within Christianity in a time period where Christianity is not being the most reasonable, as the different Christians are all fighting against each other. So one thought is this idea of a reasonable Christianity. We're using the Bible as a metaphor where the words in the Bible are not literal truth, but you're like John Locke and reading the Bible for the morality tales and the examples that can be pulled from the past that you can apply to your own life as metaphors and similes, not as dogmatic truth. So Locke is writing this as this reasonableness of Christianity. This gets into this kind of belief of latitudinarianism, which is trying to reconcile beliefs in religion with beliefs in science, and that's still happening in parts of even the United States today, where we have a scientific truth that might not be lining up exactly with what it says in the Bible or a religious truth. And again, this very much gets into an idea that we've talked about before, that you really shouldn't be worrying too much about correct dogma or practice within Christianity, that you should be taking the similes and the metaphors and the stories that Jesus is telling, the parables that he's pulling out to make his teachings understandable to the people in Jesus' time period, and then thus to you when you're reading the Bible today or during the Enlightenment. A second thought on religion is again this idea of deism, where God reveals himself through natural laws. So you're not going to see God because you're praying to him and he's the one who's going to guarantee you an A on the next world history quiz, but you're going to see God through the natural laws that he makes, the laws of relativity, the laws of uh, planetary motion, electromagnetism, gravity, laws of motion, mathematics. That's where deists see God. And so this is very much an illusion of God as the clockmaker in the picture we see on the right, where like a clock, that a clockmaker can wind a spring and then let it go, and all the springs and the gears will keep that clock going and going and going. God created the universe, is what deists believe, created natural laws, which are the springs and the gears of a clock, set it, and then left to go worry about other godly things, and the universe just kind of grows and runs itself. Deists believe very much in this idea of a just creator who will give just people a just reward. So as long as you're being a good person, you don't have to worry about knocking all those different religious kind of practices and things you have to do off of a list to get into heaven. You just be a good person because God wouldn't create a world where a good person would go to hell. It's kind of the argument that they're making here. Deists are very much going to be concerned with the here and now for the most part, to where your life on earth is just as important as your life in the afterlife. So you can enjoy life, you can have material things, you can make your life better, improve your life here on earth, then go and experience the afterlife once you get there. The third way of kind of stepping away from Christianity the Enlightenment proposes is atheism. And so this is very much, again, you probably had an idea of this, is a belief in no gods, a belief very much in this idea of materialism, that the only thing that exists in the universe is the material world that we see around us. And we see lots of different writers writing about this, David Hume, Lemaitre, D'Holbach, who are going and writing very much in this idea, put it in the context for the time period. Oh, you have all these different wars of religion, that maybe this doesn't matter, and why would a god allow this to happen? Atheism is nothing that's new. Epicurus, who we talked about with Epicureanism as Greek philosophy, is writing about this all the way back in the ancient Greek times. And so Epicurus is writing, death is nothing to us. We're just matter in motion. And so it's just a change in your state of matter from being alive to being dead. And again, Epicurus is writing about this before Christianity, the religion, exists. So atheists very much kind of propose this idea of understanding cause and effect, that life is a billiards table, right? I can go and break a billiards table, and have it set up, and then from there, I don't need to play the rest of it, because I can just mathematically calculate how the rest of the game will go based on all the different shots. So that's what atheists kind of go and propose, where everything is just matter in motion. You're being attracted as matter or repelled as matter through different laws and different states, and there's nothing really guiding you through this existence outside of yourself. So atheism very much puts your will and your destination in life in your own hands. So I know, tough to kind of conceive of this as a Catholic school, but David Hume very much trying to summarizes this up in his Problem of Evil, which he writes in 1779, where he asks the question, is God willing to prevent evil but not able to? So can he prevent a bad thing from happening, but then he's not able to? Well, Hume said then he's impotent. So if he can't stop evil from happening, then he's got no powers. Is God able to prevent evil, but not willing to prevent evil? Then he's malevolent, right? He's a big jerk. He's sitting there laughing, right? Knocking back popcorn kernels and drinking a soda as you're tripping over your own feet and you're getting rejected by the girl that you like. Hume writes, is God both able to prevent evil, but and willing to prevent evil? And then he asks, well, then why is there evil? If he's able to prevent it, he has the power to, and he's willing to do that, he wants to, then why do we still see bad things happening in the earth? And then the question becomes, is he neither able to prevent evil, nor is he willing to prevent evil? Then why is he called God? And this problem of evil very much comes up a lot, right? The eternal question, why do bad things happen to good people, is kind of a take on this. And this problem of evil is a theological idea that people are wrestling with since the beginning of recorded history, not just David Hume, and something people are still wrestling with theologically today with all different religions. Finally, the last thing we want to talk about the Enlightenment is kind of this idea of the Enlightenment's views on women. And we want to, again, like we did with Locke and Hobbes, be able to compare and contrast two different writers writing about women. So on the left, we're going to start off with Mary Wollstonecraft. And we want to preface this that Mary Wollstonecraft is a woman. So she's going to have a specific point of view as a woman versus, say, somebody who is not a woman, maybe on the other side of this chart here. Her major work where she goes and writes is The Vindication of the Rights of Women. This is a play on what we'll get into in our next PowerPoint, or the one after that, on the French Revolution and the French revolutionaries writing The Vindication of the Rights of Man. Well, Mary Wollstonecraft plays on this, where she's going and writing about, well, what about women? Wollstonecraft writes that the biological differences, women have these bits and these pieces, men have these bits and these pieces, that's what makes them men, that's what makes them women, are not significant. So these biological differences that show up between a woman with her chromosomes and a man with their chromosomes have no impact on their life, on their brain power, on their intellectual stuff. The biology between a man and woman has no effect. The individual might have an effect on it, but it's getting into the weeds a little bit. So because of that, these biological differences having no significant impact on brain development or anything like that, women have reason. And that's very simple, what Mary Wollstonecraft and other women's rights advocates are writing here, that women are reasonable and can use their brain to solve things. That's how wild and crazy that they are. Not even saying that they're equal, or not even calling for equality there. I mean, that's what she's doing. Just saying, hey, listen to us. We also have good ideas. So she says the place in society of women should be like everybody else. They're people who should be on the same level as everyone as men. Should have the same rights. They should be educated. They are human beings. Therefore, they can be public figures. They can be public citizens. They can have a life outside of the home because they are still using their brains and their logic. Right? Mary Wollstonecraft is supporting a woman president for the United States. Right? And we've seen all sorts of women leaders of nations have great success all around there, and that's what Mary Wollstonecraft is trying to get out there. That just give them a chance and they'll do fine. So Wollstonecraft says that what is human nature between men and women? Men and women have a universal human nature. They are the same. It doesn't matter the bits and pieces you're born with. Right? You're all humans and have the same experiences and abilities to go through your life as everyone else. Now, on the flip side of that is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who we talked about with his politics, and I want to see what is his thoughts on women. Rousseau, again, important clarification, is a man, so that's going to color his kind of thoughts and ideas here. Now, whereas Mary Wollstonecraft very much writing in Vindication of Rights of Women, here's what I think about women. Rousseau, you got to kind of tease his ideas on women out a little bit harder. It's not that hard to figure out, but he's very much writing on his women in his work Emile, which is a fictional story of kind of a preteen girl. But in that fictional story, we very much get what Rousseau and his kind of thinkers on women are trying to get out. Rousseau says the differences between a man and a woman, the stuff hanging off a woman's body and the stuff hanging off a man's body, and what makes men and women different, are biologically significant. Right? And so, because of that, women are not reasonable people. Okay, so Rousseau is getting to that old sexist and misogynist argument that, hey, have you ever seen a woman like at like a shoe sale and they're fighting each other because they want to get cheaper shoes or cheaper bras, or the old cartoon kind of cliche that we have there. That's again rooting in misogyny and the patriarchy and all that jazz. Right? So Rousseau says women aren't reasonable, but they are more moral creatures than men. And so that but is important. They don't have reason, higher level reasoning that men do, is what Rousseau is arguing, but they do have a heightened morality that men inherently lacked. Therefore, Rousseau says that women's place in society should be as a mother in the home sphere, using the mother's superior morality to educate future children to be able to then go raise up perfect boys and perfect girls knowing their roles. So Rousseau's idea is a belief in the human nature between men and women that's complementary. Men do X, Y, and Z very well. Women do A, B, and C very well. And why are we trying to go and enforce each group to do something that they're not good at? When working together, they provide the strengths that we want there. So that's what Rousseau is writing in contrast to Wollstonecraft. So to finish up, we'll just show you some pictures. So here's Mary Wollstonecraft. We already show you the portrait of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And again, the big writings that they have are Vindication of the Rights of Women by Mary Wollstonecraft and Emile in her education that he's going and writing about there. So that's going to cover our study of the Enlightenment, and we're going to see how these Enlightenment ideas then have an effect on the absolute monarchy and the government of France, and how those Enlightenment ideas will help bring down the French government in our study of the French Revolution.